Hi everyone. Today we are going to be talking about cellular metabolism. I'm going to play this video. Hopefully I get it all done within 15 minutes here. If not, please watch the second video that is posted. Make sure that you are taking notes on this. And then when you're all finished, you can go ahead and do the POGL, which is a worksheet. You can work on that independently or with your table. I'll make sure I leave that in the sub notes. But please make sure that you do get both these notes done and the cellular metabolism POGL for tomorrow or Thursday when I see you next. So we're going to jump into it. Oops, sorry, going to go back. So ATP, we've talked about this during the last chapter, is energy. The analogy that I've used in the past is that you can put a piece of coal on your phone and it's not going to charge your phone. You have to convert that coal into electricity and then plug in your phone in order to get it to charge. Same thing here with glucose and ATP. Glucose is going to be the coal. It does have the energy in there, but it's not what our cells, get it, cell phone cells, need in order to charge. We need the ATP energy. So I have this high energy bond here. This is where that energy is held. Adenosine tri-1,2,3 phosphate, adenosine triphosphate. This is a nucleic acid. We have the nitrogen base, we have the ribose, which is in the middle, and then the phosphates. The only difference is that in RNA and DNA we only have one phosphate, but here in ATP we have three, which is where the energy comes from. So adenosine triphosphate, once again, these are the subcomponents. Adenine, which we see in RNA and in DNA. Ribose, which we see only in RNA, ribonucleic acid, and then those three phosphate groups. So our energy cycle, we start out at ADP, and then we move on up to ATP. ADP, then to ATP. So based off of the names, ATP is adenosine triphosphate. I bet you can guess that ADP is going to be adenosine diphosphate. So ATP, it is the charged battery for the cell. We need to make this during cellular respiration, just like how a power plant is going to burn coal in order to store electricity within a generator. So it can be used up to complete activities for the cell. Once it is depleted, it can be recharged again. So ATP is charged, ADP is the used up battery, and then ATP again is the charged battery. So all of that energy is found in between the phosphate bonds. When we have a dead battery, that's ADP, we only have two. When it's a charged battery, we've got all three phosphates on there. So ADP, it is the used up battery for the cell. One of those phosphates has been removed. Now we only have two, di. And in order to charge it back up, another phosphate has to be added on. And this is what cellular respiration is going to accomplish for us. So here's yet another example of ATP versus ADP. You can see ATP has the extra phosphate on there. ADP only has two phosphates on. We need all three phosphates in order to get all that energy. So our mighty mitochondria, we saw this last week on Wednesday and Thursday when we were looking at the cell cities. We have mitochondria in animals and plants. It's a common misconception that plants don't do cellular respiration because they do photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is what gives them the glucose. They still need to burn that glucose in order to make ATP. So they then take that glucose and then use cellular respiration, make the ATP, and now they have all of the energy for their cells. Our mitochondria, we have two membranes. The second default biology question that you guys should always go for, if it's not increased surface area, you should always say, or I'm sorry, said that backwards. If it's not structure determines function, it is increased surface area. So the more surface area we have within our mitochondria, this is where we're going to have more action occurring. So the inner folds, we call those cristae. And then the matrix is going to be that gel-like layer on the inside, kind of like the cytoplasm of a normal cell. So this is overall cellular respiration. We start out with glycolysis, which is when we're turning glucose into pyruvate, sometimes pyruvic acids. Then we go inside of the mitochondria. So beforehand, all of this is taking place in the cytoplasm. Then we go into the mitochondria, where we're going to have the Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport chain, which is where we're really going to be creating a majority of our ATP. So kicking us off, I did not know I had all those animations there. Okay. Glycolysis. This is the first step. As the name suggests, glyco, we are breaking something apart. Lysis is to break apart. Glyco, you should think glucose, sugar. So we are breaking apart the glucose. This occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell. So this is before the mitochondria is even getting involved. We have glucose. Insulin is allowed that one gate to open, so now we have facilitated diffusion that is going to get the glucose inside. And then glycolysis is going to occur thanks to a lot of different enzymes that we're not going to get into, so that we can then use that pyruvate to go into the Krebs cycle. This entire process is anaerobic, meaning it does not require any energy. Aerobic refers to the requirement of oxygen, so anaerobic is going to be without oxygen. We need 2 ATPs to start this whole process, so it's kind of like you need to make money, or you need to have money in order to make more money. You need to have ATP in order to make more ATP. You got to put something into it. So then the glucose, which has 6 carbons, you may recall that it's in that hexagon shape. We split those apart so that we end up with 2 3-carbon molecules. So in the beginning, we have our glucose molecule. This looks awful. We've got a 6-carbon molecule. Then in glycolysis, we split it apart, so then we have 2 3-carbon molecules. These are pyruvates. And this is going to be a lot more efficient for the cell to use in order to go into Krebs cycle. So these 2 things broken down, in the POGL you'll see something referring to like how many 6-carbon sugar. This is what we're talking about. You're splitting everything apart. At the end of this, we do make 4 ATPs, so we have a net of gaining 2 because we put 2 in. We get 4 out. 4 minus 2 equals 2. We get 2 NADHs, which is yet another type of battery. We've got all types of batteries. We've got AAA, we've got lithium batteries, we've got AA. So NADH is another type of battery that our cell can use. It's just not as efficient or as effective. And then 2 pyruvates, which are the 3-carbon sugars, are made at the end. So next, if I have oxygen, so if I have not been exercising, if I'm laying on the couch, then my body is not under any stress and I can meet the oxygen demands that my muscles need. So if we have oxygen, we are going to go through cellular respiration. If we do not have oxygen, we're going to go through fermentation. And the fermentation, this happens once again within the cytoplasm, so we need oxygen with the mitochondria. Fermentation, this is how a lot of beers and wines are made, and this is how we get lactic acid in humans. So when your muscles are sore a day after working out, it's because your body was not able to meet up with those oxygen demands. So it went through fermentation instead, and now we have lactic acid buildup and things aren't as comfortable as they could be. So the Krebs cycle. We've already done glycolysis, which is in the cytoplasm. Now we are moving into the matrix of the mighty mitochondria. Matrix of the mighty mitochondria. This cycle is also called the citric acid cycle because we make citric acid. So the pyruvate, those 3-carbon molecules, they end up getting broken down into 2-carbon molecules. We're not going to go into the in-depth chemistry about how you're going to split these things into 2-carbon molecules. Just know that it does happen. So then after we get the 2-carbon molecule, it is going to enter the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. And then at the end, we are going to be producing 3 NADHs, 1 ATP, 1 FADH2, which is yet another type of battery, and then carbon dioxide is produced. So humans, mammals, reptiles, all of these organisms, they exhale carbon dioxide. Plants are known for like taking in carbon dioxide and exhaling oxygen. There is a net average. Plants do release a little bit of carbon dioxide, but they also soak that back up for photosynthesis. Humans don't go through photosynthesis, so we release carbon dioxide during this portion of the cellular respiration process. So because we have 2 pyruvate molecules, these are going to happen 2 times for every 1 glucose molecule. So I have 1 glucose molecule, it gets split up, and then this is going to go through the citric acid cycle, and this is going to go through a citric acid cycle. So for every 1 glucose, this process happens 2 times. Which means that if I get, if I have 1 glucose molecule, in total I'm going to end up with 6 NADHs, 2 ATP, 2 FADHs, and 4 carbon dioxide for that 1 molecule going through the citric acid cycle. So Krebs cycle, once again, 2 carbon molecule enters. This is the, it started out as pyruvate, and you can actually see there on the screen. You don't need to know the chemistry of this. You don't need to know how it works. Something that might help, we talked a lot about proteins. This is an enzyme, which is a protein, that is going to come in and alter this molecule. So the 2 carbon molecule comes into the cycle, and at the end we have all of those products. You do need to know what goes into each cycle, and you do need to know what comes out of each cycle. Okay, so then going into the electron transport chain. We will also abbreviate this as ETC. This is going to occur along the cristae, those inner folds of the mitochondria. And we talk about how surface area matters. The more surface area there is, the more this electron transport chain is going to be able to happen. So from this, we take the electrons from NADH, one of those batteries, and the other battery, FADH2. So we're stealing some of their energy, which is the electrons in this case, and the electrons are going to fuel those hydrogen pumps to pump hydrogen ions out of the matrix. So on Wednesday and Thursday, we talked about how 40% of energy is used for active transport within a cell. This is one of those places where active transport is going to be occurring. We're using some energy to push against the concentration gradient. So the hydrogen ions, they are going to end up diffusing through the membrane protein, and this is going to fuel ATP production by ATP synthase. In the end, the oxygen is going to pick up the electrons, and we are also going to be creating water. So we are stealing the electrons. You can see how they kind of flow through this little chain of events. You see this is where we lost some of the hydrogen ions that went and the electrons flow. We lose a hydrogen ion here. The electron flows through. In the end, we use the oxygen plus the electrons plus the hydrogen to make water. So we do make water in cellular respiration. It's not enough to meet with the demands that we need, so we have to drink even more water. But know that this is why we need oxygen. We need oxygen because of the electron transport chain. So you do not need to know the names of any of the components. This video is actually pretty great, although it does give you like all of the names of the proteins and the other components involved. You don't need to know all of that, but this is a nice video just to kind of go over the entire process, knowing that we do use oxygen here in the electron transport chain to pick up those hydrogen ions and create water. So, going over this again, glycolysis, we make 2 pyruvates from 1 glucose molecule. Then we go into the Krebs cycle. This is where we are going to be creating carbon dioxide as an off product of splitting off one of those carbons from the pyruvate. It goes through and we end up making NADH, FADH2, as well as a few ATP. And then after we get our electrons from the NADH and FADH2, the electrons float down, and then they go through this little pump called ATP synthase, and that's what's going to be popping on the phosphates back onto the ADPs. So the ATPs go in, the ATP synthase pops those extra phosphates back on, and now we've got the fully charged battery. So the summary of the whole thing, we start out with glucose, glycolysis, we break it off into pyruvic acid or pyruvate, And then we end up making a few byproducts like NADH and FADH too, and that is going to then drive at the end. This is an excellent tally for how many ATP are made where, which ends up totaling in 38 ATP total. Now, we are not as effective as we